You're listening to 88.7 WLUW Chicago Sound Alliance, broadcasting from the campus of Loyola University. It's live from the Heartland, featuring Michael James, Katy Hogan, and Thom Clark. Today's guests are Marilyn Katz, Dawn Rose, and Stann Champion. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Mo's bringing us in for another edition of Live from the Heartland. I'm Michael James. I'm here with Thom Clark and Katy Hogan and a bunch of other people. We're going to have a wonderful show. Our guests are Dawn Rose, Marilyn Katz, and Stann Champion, and this historic show post-election here in Chicago, where we're going to run it down and share some news and views, some insights, and then we're going to have a little music at the end. So get ready. On your mark, get set, go.
Ooh, is everyone caught up in their sleep?
No.
Yeah, me neither. I'm really still dragging a little bit. And the
I
reason?
feel like I was hit by a truck. I do. But, it's teaching me these elections are not for, what
they
can
are
I
for
say
the young
instead
at heart.
of that word I wanted to say? Anyway, you got to be something.
You worked hard, Kate. A lot of people in the 49th worked real hard, and we have a lot to show for it.
Yes, indeed.
I want to be very thankful to our current Alderman Joe Moore for a lot of the good things he did in his day. I think it was time for a change, and in our ward, we brought it on. Maria Haddon is the new alderwoman of the 49th Ward, and she's quite something else. And the campaign that she ran, with a lot of help from a lot of people we all know and many we don't know, was very, very impressive. And people around the city should take note and look at it.
I think a lot of people around the city and the region, and quite frankly the country, are looking at this because there has now been, I think kicked off by Bernie Sanders, but locally, I see a new movement. It's not trying to recreate the Harold Washington Coalition. It's not where some people thought a new movement would come from. This feels different.
Yeah,
and some of it is just very strategic training going back 1 or 2 years of potential candidates and teaching them how to actually run a good campaign. And Maria gets a lot of credit for door-to-door canvassing for a year, where she met, I don't know how many thousand voters personally. And not just to get a 1 or 2 count, but to find out what's on their mind. So what do you think? You've been through a lot of these, Katy. What made the difference in this one?
A lot of these campaigns?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that credit merely must be given to the Occupy and Black Lives Matter movement for bringing young people into the political sphere in a way that they hadn't been since probably we were young people, in terms of kind of on a radical commitment to anti-racist behavior on the part of the police, a radical commitment to ending overt sexist behavior, a lot of commitment to the poor and the unconnected in any city, anywhere. So these kids got radical quick, and yes, Bernie was a turning point that gave them a place to play in the electoral field, which, thank you, Bernie, because without him, I'm not sure if we would have had this range of wins over the last 6 months in both the November elections and in ours this week that reflect the young people's engagement, as well as the young people stepping up. Everybody here remembers talking to the candidate who eventually won last week when she was on the show, who she was inspired by the election of Trump, as so many were, to go to one of those weekend trainings of, so you want to be a candidate. Mm-hmm. This is how you do it. And clearly, she was ahead of the game as far as I'm concerned, as somebody who does this, for sort of a quasi-living. She was way ahead of the game, as you said, knocking on doors 20 months ago. And that's what it took, evidently. She won 2-1, and that's pretty much of a shellacking, as Obama would put it.
It was real impressive to see on Election Day. I was out, I voted early, and then I went and took photographs of just a whole lot of people working the phones at Maria's headquarters, and a whole lot of people going out door to door, starting at 10 o'clock.
Well, we had an early warning, I think, in Rogers Park, because the Maria's win mirrors the percentages we got for the Charter Freeze referendum just a few years ago, when we started a different kind of organizing, or revived organizing in Rogers Park. That was Network 49 and a lot of school activists who continued through this election. The phenomenal flyering of parents on the weekend before the election.
That was fabulous.
Just was a great flyer,
Brilliant.
and hats off to the folks who worked on that. But go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say that during the debate we had between Alderman Moore and the new Alderwoman Maria Haddon, I got to say I saw Joe turn and look at Maria and kind of what I thought he was thinking was, oh wow, this is for real. Because she was formidable, and she had a lot of depth to her comments, and there were certainly many people at that debate at Sullivan High School who were undecided at that time. But I think that was a significant shift.
Well, she had poise too, which is something Joe is always a little envious of in a public situation. Someone maintaining poise, and it's interesting that you point that out, because I do feel like there was no evidence that Joe was actually trying to win the election in the last couple of weeks. I saw we all got knocked doors by his paid canvassers early on, maybe a month or so before the campaign, a little bit, maybe just after the what their team called the so-called debate at the end of the. Anyway, I want to say this. I have tried to figure out a way to put it on Facebook, but it hasn't come forward yet. I consider Joe Moore a friend.
Me too.
Actually, and having a friend like Joe means that I go to Cubs games when I'm not a Cubs fan. Having a friend like Joe means I put him to work, asked him to help us for the Washington re-election campaign in '87, and he did a yeoman's job. He did an incredible job, and it was the start of our political camaraderie as folks who worked in politics. Joe always had a little bit of a snark when he had an opponent, all the way to a lot. But I'm not going to dwell on that, except to say he didn't show it publicly this time around, and for that I'm grateful. What was hard for me was to watch all the nasty ad hominem attacks that he suffered, much less his family members, which is never fair for his kids. Barbara entered the fray this time, so she was going to get it, and she knew it. But I don't agree with those ad hominem attacks. I don't think they're right. I don't understand. I think that folks who are just coming up and maybe voted for the first time this year or last year don't see the history that Joe Moore actually brought to the 49th Ward, which was a continuation of progressive politics started by David Orr, and he really did a fine job for a long time.
Yep.
There's no doubt that social media has changed the way we talk about these things, and I'm not sure it's all for the good.
Right.
But I don't want to dwell on that right now. Actually, we'll get to some other things, and then our guest.
Yep.
Michael, you were co-chair of the 49th Ward Democratic Party.
I was.
Joe Moore is still the ward committeeman. What role is he going to continue to play in the party or the neighborhood as a public person, do you think?
Well, I think Joe still lives in the neighborhood, and hopefully he'll be like, an elder in the neighborhood. I don't know if he wants to stay active in the Democratic Party and the downtown workings of the Democratic Party. He is the ward committeeman. That was when he decided he wanted to be the ward committeeman after David Fagas's death. I think that's when the majority of the steering committee decided that no, we didn't want that, and that was when we left his Democratic Party in the 49th Ward. Whether he decides to run for ward committeeman or not, I don't know. There's some people starting to talk about what that role means this day and age, and whether or not someone is going to want to pick up that mantle, whether it be Maria. I would hope it would be someone separate from the alderperson. And I don't think Joe should remain as the ward committeeman, given the new tenor of things in the ward.
Katy, you've really dug into some of the figures. How did things break out in the ward in terms of mayoral candidates?
Oh, mayoral. Well, Lori won, and Tony came in right behind her, and Amara behind her, which was exactly
what our straw
Network
poll showed.
49's straw poll for mayor showed a little over a month ago, which is interesting. I mean, it really does feel
Who
like...
would have thought we'd hit it?
Network 49 does have its hand on the pulse, I think, in some way. the citywide, we're going to talk about the results with our esteemed guests in a moment.
Well, let me note that in addition to the election, the police consent decree went into effect this week.
Yes, yes.
A monitor was picked. A judge has been picked.
Right.
This is another citizen effort to force the police department to come into the 21st century, to get better training, to be more responsive, and to rebuild trust that's not there in many communities around the city.
Right.
It's a phenomenally significant.
Godspeed to all of you involved in that, especially our cohorts.
And then I also want to mention that we have a very interesting campaign that's going to happen just to the south of our ward, in the 40th ward, that involves the new finance chair, Patrick O'Connor, another long-term incumbent who did not win, is forced into a runoff by another recent guest on this show, Andre Vasquez. He emerged from a field of how many challengers?
100.
And,
No, there were like 4 others.
and ran a phenomenal campaign, similar to Maria's in terms of having door-to-door canvassing long-term out. That'll be a very interesting one to look at, and I hope our guests will help us with some of the other interesting races around the city.
Well, we'll see if the other candidates in that, one of them who was a little grumbly that she had run the year before, whether she comes in and supports Andre or not.
Exactly.
All of those races have that question.
Yeah, well,
in
we'll
the
talk
47th, I mean the 40th, the 46th, and the one down south, 33. Actually, 33 is Deb Mell and the woman who beat her in the vote total. So she's running for her political life there.
And because we talked about it, I just want to mention in passing that something else that happened this week behind the headlines is that the head of the Park District tore up his golden parachute contract.
Yes.
Rahm had tried to keep some of his top people beyond his term, so that would handcuff the new mayor. And at least some of the people involved with that little maneuver have decided it may be more ethical, like is normally the case, to resign. And so perhaps we'll see some other good stuff from Rahm in his final couple of months before new people come in. How this all affects Springfield and JB, how the shifting political winds in Chicago may be changed by this campaign, we'll get to in a few minutes when we bring in our 2 esteemed guests. You're listening to Live from the Heartland on WLUW Chicago 88.7 FM. Please like us on Facebook.